Yeah, it's wonderful to be with everybody this evening. And just to say who I am, so I'm Matthew. I'm one of the Naturetrek leaders. I do this in my spare time. So my day job is with Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, and I therefore have been leading for Naturetrek about 6 years. I think 2017, I think was the first time I did a trip. Um, I did quite a bit in the UK, places like Spain. I quite like North America, so I do the States and Canada. But this summer, I was very, very lucky to be asked if I would co-lead the Arctic and Spitsbergen, the realm of the polar bear. So I'm at the opposite end of the globe to Paul, and it's fair to say it's a truly incredible place. I cannot recommend this tour highly enough. It's definitely up there in trip of the lifetime kind of category. The wildlife, the scenery, absolutely incredible. So let's set the scene a little bit. So we're definitely in the Arctic, but this is absolutely the top of the world. So you can see here on the map, you can see here where Spitsbergen is, but you can also see a little bit further down, you've got Iceland, and the Arctic Circle runs through the southern part of Iceland. So we are so high up, we're as far north of the Arctic Circle as London is south of it. And the North Pole is up at 90 degrees, and we go past the 80-degree line. So at our most northerly point, we're only about 700 miles short of the North Pole, which is incredible. And in terms of the trip itself, so we fly to Oslo, and we spend a night there in Oslo, and then the next day we head onwards and we fly into a place called Longyearbyen, which is here on Spitsbergen, and we normally fly back. If the flights are okay, we fly back in the same day, but sometimes it depends on the flights, and we may overnight in Oslo on the way back. And as has been outlined earlier this evening, these are exclusive charters of boats. It's a wonderful cruise experience, and our aim is to try and circumvent the island of Spitsbergen here, which is part of the Svalbard archipelago. It does depend on the weather conditions. Paul was saying the same earlier. The ice conditions can mean that we're kind of at the mercy of those in terms of where we can get to. So this year we made it all the way around to the top, out up into the pack ice, but it was so thick that we had to turn back and head back to the northern coast, came back along and back round the same side as we'd gone up. That wasn't actually too bad, because what it did mean was that we could head out to the northwest and hit the continental shelf and head back down that way. And the continental shelf is excellent for whales, so we've got a really good all-round experience by doing that. And this is the view as we descended down to land in Longyearbyen. And you could just sense the excitement across the plain as people got their first sighting. It is just such a stunning landscape. There was just a succession of mobile phones being handed to those who were lucky enough to have the window seat so they could take photos with people. And Spitsbergen means pointed mountain. And when you sit there on the plain and look out, and you kind of see this whole crinkly landscape, you really do know why they called it pointed mountain. It's fantastic. And we get a little bit of time in Longyearbyen before we board the boat and head off on the cruise. And that means that people can wander around the town for a bit, pick up some bits and bobs. Or most people, we tend to lead a bit of a walk down to the lagoons nearby. And that gives us our first kind of introduction to the wildlife of the area, which is nice. There's some dog kennels down there, which is quite interesting, because the huskies are quite good at making sure that it's not a particularly attractive place for the Arctic foxes. The dogs scare them away. And that's quite interesting, because a lot of the birds have learned that it's therefore quite a safe place to nest. So it's a really good spot for a walk down here. So you'll get lots of eider duck just nesting right by the track. And you can see this one here with all the eider down, which is fantastic. There's Arctic terns everywhere, just flying around, and lots of geese too. lots of barnacle geese down in this area, but you'll also probably get pink-footed goose. And actually, as you get further north on the tour, you might be lucky and get Brent goose as well. And this was one of the really interesting things for me. This was really lovely because I'm used to a diet of geese in the winter in the UK, you know, in the sort of wide open landscapes of places like Norfolk. So to see them actually in the breeding landscape and see them with eggs and with chicks and goslings and things like that was fantastic. And you can see just from the picture here, just what a different landscape and place it is to appreciate the geese. And that walk around Longyearbyen, again, you're introduced to the kind of ubiquitous snow bunting. So this is the only real passerine that breeds in any numbers on Svalbard and Spitsbergen. You might get the odd wheatear, things like that from time to time. But this, if it's going to be a passerine, it's going to probably be a snow bunting. And again, I'm used to seeing them in the winter, and they're quite drab. You see them in this area in the summer, and they are just absolutely spanking birds. This lovely, lovely black and white, as you can see here. So yeah, it's really a nice, even on that first afternoon, you're just getting a real feel for how special this place is. And this is the MV Quest. So this is our vessel for the trip. So we can take about 50 clients, 50 passengers, it's ice strengthened hull, again, a bit like the Ortelius that Paul was mentioning. So we can go through the pack ice and we can get into all the sort of key parts of the islands and see all the fantastic wildlife. It's a really good boat. I like to think this slide has all the important things in it, really. So binoculars and beer, but it's also worth talking about the rest of the boat. So it's really well appointed, decent sized cabins. This is in the observation lounge. This photo was taken, so it gives you really nice panoramic views. There's TV screens at each end, so we can do lectures and talks and things like that if the weather's not quite so good. It's a really great place to watch the wildlife from. The restaurant is really good. I have to say the food was absolutely amazing. So nobody will ever go hungry on the MV Quest. I can guarantee it. And you're also really well looked after. So there's an expedition team, and they're responsible for the overall route, where we go. They do the logistics, getting people on and off shore. So it's Zodiac boats for landings. They've got polar bear training, so they carry guns, and you know they make sure that you're safe. So we listen to what they say. They have overall control. But there is a team of 3 Naturetrek leaders. So there's me and there's Mike Crew, who Paul mentioned earlier, who's going to be in Antarctic. Matt Eade here on the right. And we're there to make sure that everything goes smoothly. And we specialize in finding you the wildlife. So lots of those Arctic cruises, they have a mix of things that they try and do. They might do lots of history and heritage. And actually, you don't always see the wildlife that you might hope for. So the good thing about this is that we complement those expedition leaders really well. They make sure that the logistics are good. They make sure that we're safe and sound. They're really good all-rounders, but they really like working with us because we've got the time and the expertise to be able to focus on finding the wildlife, scanning for things, looking for Arctic foxes, looking for cetaceans all the time. So that works really, really well. I was really impressed with the setup and how it worked when I was on the trip this year. You can tell that we're the Naturetrek leaders in this image because of the bright yellow fluorescent hats. So this is a feature of our Arctic polar trips, is that the leaders are easily identifiable on shore by the fluorescent yellow. For me, this felt a little bit like being given your kind of England cap. I've been given my fluorescent yellow hat, and I still have it, and will wear it this winter with pride. And once you leave the port, one of the commonest birds that you're going to see is the fulmars, but there'll also be always things in sight: Brunix guillemots, little auks, glaucous gulls, kittiwakes, things like that. These fulmars, though, they often circle around the boat, and they're your constant companions. And it's really nice having them there all the time. And because it's 24 hours of daylight, there are always fulmars with you. These are much more smoky coloured, you can see here, compared to the ones that we get in the UK. So commonly they call them blue fulmars. It's still the same species as ours, though. And one of our first ports of call is the Nyalsund area, and you can just see how visually stunning this place is. So if you love photography, this is definitely a bucket list place. And that first morning we went ashore, and we got all 4 species of skua on the trip. So Pomerine, Arctic, great. But this is definitely my favorite. I think it's probably the favorite of most people. This particular site at Nyalsund and Camp Mansfield is home to a couple of pairs of long-tailed skuas. So Matt, one of the other guys, he took this superb photo. I think it really shows that long tail really nicely. These things normally feed on lemmings, but you don't get any lemmings up here in Spitsbergen. So this means that they're quite a rare breeding bird up here. So it's always nice if we manage to get those, and we did this year. And one of the great things about being on land and being out on the tundra is the wonderful assortment of flowers. Tim has led this trip before. He's a fantastic botanist. We had Mike alongside us this year, and you get this wonderful assortment. At times it's a carpet of flowers just blooming for a short period in the Arctic summer, and you get some really cool things that are really rare in the UK but really common up there. So things like this, which is mountain avens, which is forming a bit of a nice carpet here with the hills in the background. And another really common plant up there, you just get carpets of these things. This is purple saxifrage. Other things might include Svalbard poppy. So this is the national flower of the area. This one's the paler form, but you also get a rarer yellow form too. And as we go ashore, it's always nice to take a bit of a walk through the woods. Only here, the woodland is a little bit different because it's only 2 or 3 inches tall. So it's not, you're not going to get lost in amongst the trees, it's fair to say, on Svalbard. So this is polar willow. It's the world's tiniest tree. And I thought that was pretty cool. There's plenty of other things to see. So you've got reindeer here. This is the smallest subspecies of reindeer. They can be quite tame, especially in the Longyearbyen area. We had them wandering up to us to have a bit of an investigation of who we were and what we were doing. You go to other places in the world and these are often herded. So these are, I think you'd probably say these are only real genuine wild reindeer out there, which is nice. We also got these when we went ashore. This is ptarmigan. This is the only land bird that stays year round in the archipelago. And you can see here that this is a summer plumage male. So the females are white in the winter, and then they go this cryptic brown plumage in the summer. But the males, they stay white year round, but they do actually molt into a slightly more dirty brown plumage. So when you see them up here in the summer in Spitsbergen, they look like they've kind of been out to play in the mud, but actually it's natural. It's just the way they look at that time of year. And we stopped at the research station at Nyalsund, and this is, I think it's probably the most northerly permanently inhabited place on Earth. And this was the only place this year that we managed to get grey phalarope. We did actually get a bonus redneck phalarope out on the sea, but that's not a usual bird, whereas this is one that you would expect to get on one of the trips. We had a pair, which was nice, and as you'll probably all know, but the phalaropes, they have sexual dimorphism, so the females are going to be the brighter birds and the males are going to be the paler birds. And so we had a really nice bright brick red female on one of the lakes right next to the research station, which was great. We just set the telescopes up on it and let people have a look. It was good. And sometimes we don't always land when we go out. We will take Zodiac cruises, and this scenery just seems to get better and better throughout the whole trip. I know it's probably not true, but it just felt that way as far as I was concerned. And there's just fantastic glaciers with all these crinkly edges. And there was one time when we heard this massive boom and some of the front carved off, which was just incredible to watch. And we got to go up close to these, and you'd often have things like bearded seals just resting on some of the ice floes in front of that. And one of the things that we were really lucky with this time round, this trip this year, was beluga whale. So they don't always get them, I believe, every single year, and not always in particularly good numbers. These do seem to like hugging the coastline, and often will be seen near the glacier areas. And this year we saw, I think it's probably fair to say, about 350 beluga whales in several large pods. You don't get much more of a view than this, to be fair. They tend to just roll, these white backs just roll at the surface. There's no dorsal fin at all on these things. So you just see these little kind of, it looks like boiled eggs bobbing around in the water, to be fair, but it's still great to see. And it was one of the ones that I was really keen to try and see if we got the chance. And this was our first polar bear sighting. So it was a little bit distant, but it was a female and a cub that had been feeding on a dead walrus. They were asleep for quite a bit of the time, but we just moored up and we watched them for a good hour or more. Really good telescope views, and everybody was just delighted. The pressure was off once we got our first polar bear. But after a while, the cub did wake up, decided to have a bit of a stretch and a yawn, and then went over and pounced on mum, had a bit of a roll, bit of a play, and then started suckling. And okay, it was a little bit distant, but it was an absolute incredible moment. It was just one of those things that you really dream about seeing. And every single person on that boat was just delighted that we managed to see this bit of interaction. It was superb. Another one of the real highlights for me of a trip to the area is just the seabird colonies. Clouds of birds. There are 800,000 pairs of Brunix guillemots, for example. There are just thousands upon thousands of seabirds. And when you're at one of these breeding colonies on these cliffs, the noise, the just constant flocks of birds coming back, clouds of them, it's just an assault on the senses. I have to say my absolute favorite was the little auks, spending an hour or so just sat on a rock, watching the little auks coming and going, the interactions, the courtships, the displays, and the noise as well. It's like this sort of high-pitched laughing noise. It was absolutely joyous. I can't tell you how much of a privilege it was to sit there and watch that little auk colony. It was just fantastic. And wherever you get the seabird colonies, you get Arctic fox. I think I don't know, we probably saw 15, 20 maybe over the course of the trip. Most of them were quite distant, but we did get some close ones on a couple of occasions. It's fair to say I don't think they're like me. Whichever group I was with, it was the other group that got the close sighting. So I never got as close as this, but I did get some good views. This photo was therefore taken by Matt, one of the other guides. They got one walk right past them at one point and catch a gosling. And another thing that if you're going to do this trip, you're going to really, really enjoy is heading out into that pack ice at the north of Spitsbergen. It's just a unique thing to do, crunching your way through these big slabs of ice, having to reverse once in a while and have another run at a big piece to kind of knock it out of the way. And you just slowly pick your way through. And you can just see ice for as far as the eye can see. Everybody comes up, everybody stands at the front and has their photo taken. It's really, really good. This year, we struggled a little bit. The ice hadn't shifted as north as it normally does. So as I said earlier, we had to retreat a little bit eventually. But that was good news for the polar bears. There was easy access for them from the land onto the ice shelf so they could go and hunt for seals. So a good year for the polar bears. It did mean for us that we didn't get any polar bear sightings out on the pack ice. The trip that came a couple of weeks after ours, which coincidentally Tim was one of the leaders on, they did get into the pack ice and they got this particular polar bear really close to the boat. So this is one of Tim's photos, and I included it just to show you the sort of views that you can get when you get them out here on the ice. And that pack ice is also where you look for these things. So the ivory gulls, we saw several of those, and they tend to follow the polar bears around and scavenge at their kills. So normally if you find a bear, you'll often find one of these too. And another one that people are really always keen to see when we go, and I was no different, and that's walrus. So we got to get really close at some of the haul outs, which is nice. And they're just fantastic to watch. You can see these things Okay, they sleep for long periods, but when they wake up, they've got such character, and they jostle around and they poke each other with their tusks, and they kind of get each other out of the way. And just seeing that sort of social interaction and the personalities of them coming through was one of the things that really stood out for me. And given we couldn't get through that pack ice, it gave us an opportunity to track back down south over the continental shelf. So where the sea sort of bed drops off and the upwelling of nutrients comes up, that's always really good for nutrients and food, and therefore that's always really good for whales. And so you could stand on the bridge and you could see where the deep water was, and it was no surprise, as soon as we hit that continental shelf, we found whales. The first ones that we found were fin whales. We'd already seen a few, but we got to see some really close and really good fin whale activity here. You can see on this photo the distinctive sort of dorsal fin, and there's a really distinctive sharp ridge down there from the back of the dorsal fin to the tail. So that's one of the real kind of diagnostic features of these things. These are the second largest whale in the world. And that ridge down the back means that they were sometimes called razorbacks, and you can see why from the photo. Better was to come though, and I think if you see this photo in comparison, you can see just what a different beast the blue whale is. We stayed up all night because we were in the good area and we wanted to try and get something for the clients. 3:30 in the morning, we found this particular blue whale, and we just got to spend time with it surfacing right next to the boat. And that was just such a special moment. And you can see the size difference between that and even the second largest whale, the fin whale, is just chalk and cheese. And it was polar bear, I think, was the top thing for people. Close second was blue whale. So to get them both was really, really great. We saw 5 polar bears in total. Our last encounter was pretty special, it's fair to say. So we came across a young male, and we got to follow him along the shore at close range. He just climbed all these boulders. He slid down one of the snowy slopes for us. And we watched him just chugging along gently alongside, not disturbing him at all. And then we noticed that there was another polar bear coming the other way. And this was a big bruiser of a male. He was huge, big heavyweight thing. And about half a mile range, the young one just stood up on his back legs, sniffed the air, and you could tell he was like, uh-oh. And this thing just kept plodding towards him. And it was just sort of this real sort of tension, what was going to happen, because this male, would he tolerate this young one at all? So the young one headed off inland, and he scooted past him, as you can see here in the photo. This was the moment where they crossed. And it was just such a kind of a wildlife documentary moment, I suppose. And the male didn't seem bothered at first. He carried on heading past, and then he stopped, had a think, and thought, no, do you know what? I'm going to have this one. And he turned around and he just started following in its footsteps, in its exact footsteps. And the young one would run a bit, stop, look over its shoulder, and then see that it was coming closer, run a bit, stop, look over his shoulder. And the big one never sort of changed pace at all. It just kept plodding and coming, step, 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 step. And this went on for quite a while until the young one headed off inland over the brow of the hill. The big one followed over it, and everybody was just left thinking, did it get away? What happened? We never found out. We never knew. It was a topic of conversation for about 2 days after. But it was just one of those compelling moments that you just get on a Naturetrek cruise. It was absolutely fantastic. So that's kind of my experience of the Arctic this year. It was just the best trip ever. I know Paul would probably say the Antarctic would rival it. I'm sure it does. Both of them are just superb destinations. If I told you I came back with about 5,000 photos, that'll give you an idea of how hard it was to whittle this talk down to 20 minutes. But hopefully it's given you a bit of a flavour of what is just a truly amazing place. Happy to try and answer any questions later. But that's it essentially from me, and I'll hand you back to Sarah.